The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. On today's episode, we are joined by Cindy Bailey, Corporate Sustainability Officer, and Chris Henry, Fleet Director at Purolator. As Purolator's Corporate Sustainability Officer, Cindy is responsible for leading the development of Purolator's environmental sustainability strategy, advancing policies and standards, managing environmental risks and opportunities, and improving Purolator's performance, disclosures, and reputation related to the environment and climate change. Currently, Cindy is leading the development of Purolator's emissions reduction goals and roadmap, which includes electrifying 60% of Purolator's last-mile delivery vehicles by 2030. Chris Henry is a leader in electrification for Canada's leading parcel delivery company as the Director of Fleet for Purolator. He has held cross-functional roles in sales, marketing, procurement, change management, and continuous improvement. In his current role, Chris will draw upon his 25-plus year career to deliver on Purolator's greenhouse gas emission goals. Now let's get into the episode with Purolator.
Good to be back.
Yes, another exciting event for us with our guest today. Looking forward to this as well.
As am I. On today's episode, we are joined by Cindy Bailey, Corporate Sustainability Officer, and Chris Henry, Fleet Director at Purolator. Welcome, Cindy and Chris.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to kick this off, Cindy. And for our listeners around the world, they may not know the firm that you work with, so certainly let me set this up. Can you give us some background on what Purolator is and what your firm actually does for our listeners?
Sure, happy to. Thank you. So Purolator, we're a leading integrated freight, package, and logistics solutions provider. We've been in business for over 60 years. We have a very proud Canadian heritage here at Purolator. Our networks are very extensive, so we deliver packages to more than 99.9% of postal codes across Canada. We have a very large network of facilities with over 175 terminals and more than 2,000 authorized shipping agents. In 2022, we actually delivered more than 160 million packages across Canada. We also offer customized shipping and innovative supply chain solutions. And we're very committed to new technologies, innovation, enhanced customer experience, and a world-class culture. One of the things that's really unique about Purolator is that we are a people-first organization with over 14,000 employees. And we really focus here at Purolator on creating an environment that's safe, sustainable, inclusive, and really an inspiring place to work.
It's fantastic. And you know what? I think there's certainly a big part of market is you're dominant in the Canadian market and the services, but you also do work outside Canada as well, don't you? You have some terminals and offices outside Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. We do have several locations in the U.S. as well, and we do have services that we offer inbound and outbound with the U.S.
Thank you for that, Cindy.
I will say it's a good day when a Purolator truck's outside my house. That's what I love to see is a Purolator truck outside.
Yes, absolutely. And I think we are, we're very well recognized in the community. I think that's one of the areas where we really excel is that our communities recognize Purolator. And again, this is because we are in pretty much every community across Canada, even the super remote locations. And we're very active in the community as well. We have a lot of community investment and engagement initiatives that we do. So our customers are very familiar with the Purolator trucks.
I'm really pretty excited to have you guys as guests because for our listeners, we had a breakfast session where we're talking about electrification of fleet, and Purolator and some others were speaking about what they're doing. That's why we're pleased to have them here to talk about it. But if you could, Cindy, what are the top three things that need to be done or considered before you start the zero emission transition? Because you guys are actually doing that. You've been involved in doing that for several years, maybe many listeners may not be aware of that, but your firm has been working on that for a while. So can you share with them what are the top 3 things that need to be done or considered before you start that zero emission transition?
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to. So you're right. We have been working on this for some time. We are a very innovative organization. So we actually got into this space many years ago with hybrid vehicles and other sort of unique technologies many years ago. But I think, as we're moving towards the green transition and obviously, our state of higher expectations around providing green products and services, I think there's a few things that we've had to kind of drill down and make sure that we have in place before we really move in an aggressive way towards zero emission. So the first thing I would say is senior leadership buy-in and support, also from our board. So this is something we've worked on over the last few years to make sure that we're communicating well with these folks, that we're bringing them along the journey with us, that they are helping us to create the roadmap and create the plans. And just, again, making sure that they're really bought into the process and the goals that we're setting. We certainly have recognized over the last couple of years that to make this transition is going to be a huge transformation for our business. So we need to ensure that all levels of our senior leadership group and our board are all along on this journey with us, because we need everyone across the organization. If we're going to make this happen, we need everyone to support and be part of what we're doing. So that's the first thing I would say is really important, is to make sure that leadership is well informed and that they're part of the journey, they're part of the decision making, and they are aligned with what the organization is trying to do. The second thing I think is very important before you really dive into your zero emission transition journey is really understanding where your emissions are coming from. So this needs to be, the first thing that organizations look at when they're considering reducing their emissions and possibly setting some goals, is where do your emissions come from? And once you've done that work to understand those emission sources, measure them, and really set a strong baseline that you're going to work from, that will help you establish goals and a work plan. But it's very difficult to know where to focus your efforts and what you need to do next if you don't have a strong understanding of your emissions and where they're generated in your business. And also what's most impactful, because every business will be very different in terms of what your most material environmental impacts are and where you can really make a difference. The third thing I would say is, deciding where you want to be in this journey. So how ambitious do you want to be? Are you going to set, really aggressive science-based targets and try to align yourself with net zero? Are you going to go faster or slower? Do you want to be a leader or a follower? I think it's really important to decide this and get everyone, again, bought into what you're trying to do. Obviously, the pace at which you're going to need to move is going to be different. The investment required is going to be different. And the opportunities that will come from both sides, whether you want to be a leader or a fast follower, that there will be differences. So I think everyone needs to come together and sort of make this decision in terms of, where you're going to stand with this. And then again, that will allow you to set the appropriate goals and work plan.
Cindy, it was music to certainly, I think, John and my ears, because we've been doing these podcasts. I think this is our 101st podcast, and we've been talking about how important senior executives have to be involved, because this isn't a transaction. This is many years of a transition. And then the other key thing that you conveyed, which loved, is this takes a variety, if not everyone in the organization, to participate. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope our listeners really listen to what you've said and make sure they follow through with that. I appreciate that.
Okay, Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
I think the one thing that kind of resonates in my mind with respect to this is kind of the iterative planning process that's going to have to go on, and to understand that that's one of the elements that's going to be needed. Again, when you talk about engaging your stakeholders and other people in the organization, the concept that you have to keep going back and planning and replanning because of the evolution of the technology, the regulatory side, as well as just the innovation that's going on in the business. You have to be able to understand you're going to have to relook at what your initial plan was, because it may not be up to date. The dynamics of the marketplace may have changed, the environment may have changed. So understanding that just because you put a plan in, whether it's a 3 or 5 year plan, you need to come back and revisit it constantly and be diligent about it.
Okay, so you're committed to this. You've got your objectives. You've got your plan in place. Can you describe to us some of the changes that are occurring within your operations and everything to support this drive to zero emissions? Because it's one thing we know. Lots of organisations say, "Yep, we're going to get to net zero 2050. Job done. Carry on business as usual." My understanding is you're not doing business as usual. So how is it changing?
What we're starting to see in our business, first and foremost, is, as I referenced before around planning, is around our resources. We're understanding that the nature of this business is going to require dedicated resources. We're looking at managing projects, large projects, and it's not a side of the desk endeavor that maybe we would have tried before, just because of the size and nature of it. We have a dedicated team in Cindy's team. I now have dedicated people in my fleet team who are responsible. And that's just for electrification, let alone all of the other GHG activities that we're doing. And that's what we're seeing is a change in how we manage our projects, how we manage ourselves. So to get resource first to be able to manage this, I think is one of the more significant pieces that we have to engage in order to make these plans come to fruition. Secondarily, we are seeing infrastructure changes to our buildings, to our terminals, improvements overall to our business, which I think is a great thing. We get to create new infrastructure, whether it could be new vehicles, upgrading our facilities, these kinds of things, and certainly they all require capital to do so. But just making general improvements in our facilities and our overall operations is another large change that we're seeing.
Yeah, and I think just to add a few more items to those great points that Chris made. So, Chris talked about resources, and the other part of that too is also investment. So, I think the organization has recognized and committed to the fact that significant upfront investments are going to be required to move this program along. So we are seeing a lot of funding and resources being shifted towards the decarbonization program. And again, strong commitment from our leadership and our board to achieve these goals. The other item that I would talk about is cultural change. So over the last few years, and especially as we've started to roll out this program, we're seeing a big culture change in the organization as it relates to sustainability. So we have actually embedded this in our core values. That was something that was updated last year. And we are seeing that, there is intense interest and engagement across the org towards this program and wanting to be involved. And of course, they're super supportive as they're starting to see different things rolling out in their workspace. So this could be anything from some of the changes that Chris talked about around infrastructure. So bringing electric vehicles into their terminals. We're deploying urban quick stops in some of our urban centers. We have e-bikes out there. We're starting to do things like bring renewable fuels into some of our locations. So our employees are seeing this, and they're very much supportive and on board with this. Another thing that we're seeing that's changing as we at Purolator is as we move towards zero emissions is the interest from our customers. So we're seeing more and more interest from them all the time. Lots of requests to hear about our environmental sustainability plans and our targets, and really understand, how this impacts their business and the services that we provide to them. We're getting a lot of customers that are asking us to provide them with low carbon transportation solutions, as well as carbon reporting. So they too have goals that they're trying to achieve, and they want to understand how the emissions associated with their packages feeds into their goals and their emissions. And then I would say another thing that we're continuing to do is to really be innovative. So again, we're trying to find those really innovative solutions to help solve some of these climate challenges. And we're looking to implement these. Even if we are first, we want to implement these types of solutions and learn from them. We're looking at things like mobile carbon capture. And again, I mentioned our new unique urban quick stops that are in the urban centers that are operating with low speed vehicles and e-bikes. So lots of creative solutions that the team is working on to meet this challenge.
Cindy, can I just quickly, that is so rich of detail and great information for our listeners. But I wanted to pick up because you said you added a value to the organization on this whole thing. Can you describe what that is just for our listeners? Because values are so important. It tends to drive organizations. Mm-hmm. What is that value that you put in or inserted to cover this transition? Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, it's looking at environmental sustainability and also just sustainability in general. Okay. So I think, what we're finding, and, we've talked here a lot about leadership, buy-in and support, and also across the organization, all employees and stakeholders being on board. So one of the things that we really want to embed across the organization is the idea of environmental sustainability, and looking at how we bring that to work every day in all the things we do. So not just, obviously electrifying our fleet and some of the bigger programs that we have going on, but I think as we talk more and more about environmental sustainability and how this is a key driver for our organization and our strategy, our employees are starting to think of ways every day that they can contribute and make this a key part of their work.
Yeah, thank you for that. I want to go a slightly different angle on it. I mean, it's clear that you are totally committed to this and you see the benefits of it. We find in our work that there are a number of people who are, shall we say, resistive of the transition. They don't really want to engage with it. We are seeing here in UK and Europe, we're seeing a bit of pushback on net zero and ESG, environment, society and governance issues. I wonder if you could give us some examples. Are there opportunities for Purolator from this transition? I mean, I think you've touched on it slightly about some of your customer base, but if you were, could you give us a sort of a nice sales pitch of the opportunities that going through the transition brings to your business?
So there are several immediate opportunities that we talk about. What is this bringing to Purolator and to Canada, if you will? And Lysandra, you kind of touched on it where you talked about you're seeing Purolator vehicles in the neighborhoods. And I think our connection with our communities is quite strong. And this allows us to connect even further with our customers, with our communities. We already offer and work on a Tackle Hunger program, which is a food give to food banks across the country, where we engage with our local communities. And by beginning to invest in GHG reduction programs, and whether it's electrification or other pieces, we believe we're actually investing in our communities, both our employees and our communities. When we do these, we're giving back. We're trying to use less energy. We're trying to be a more considerate corporate partner in the neighborhoods by polluting less in those communities. And hopefully, we're seen as people who are being proactive in that area. And I think that's an important part as we talked about, not only for the communities, but for our employees, who are a very proud and prideful group. For them to be able to drive around in neighborhoods in green electric vehicles, to be able to offer carbon reduced packages of deliveries, I think is an important part. And that's also kind of leads into the next area where it's engagement. And so we're engaging not only with communities, we're engaging with other similar partners to ourselves, other fleets, other organizations that are GHG driven. So we're expanding our network of connections in this space. And Cindy and her team are doing an amazing job of reaching out and being part of those communities where we can share not only what we're doing, but we can learn, we can innovate, we can start to adopt other practices. So I think one of the biggest opportunities here is this kind of community or network inside the GHG area that we're starting to really get a toehold in, if you will. As Cindy said, we may not lead everything, but we're certainly either following, supporting, and in some cases we are leading. But I think it's an important part that we, as a corporate citizen, that we be involved very strongly, and as a leading Canadian organization, that we promote it as much as possible. So being in this area has allowed us to speak with other organizations, universities, communities, and to help further not only our cause, but the cause of GHG reduction in Canada.
Yeah, I agree with everything Chris said there. That was really great. One thing I would add on, Chris touched on employees. And I think one thing we've seen over the last year or two is the struggle to attract and retain top talent. And this is one thing we're hearing more and more through our recruitment teams, and even just myself trying to hire team members for my team. Employees are really looking for this, right? And as we go back to, the idea of our core values, employees want to work for organizations that are taking this seriously and have a plan to reduce emissions and be greener. So I think one of the opportunities that we're seeing, as we're moving forward in this space, is more opportunities to attract and retain that top talent, and give our employees some of the things that they're asking about and looking for. And then the other part, of course, which we talked about already, was customers. So again, also this is really important to many of our customers. So we are starting to see that there may be an opportunity here for market differentiation of our products and services through this transition. So there may be opportunities, in addition to just greening our overall products and service offering, there may be opportunities to bring new products and services to the market that meet the needs of certain customers that are more advanced in their journey. And then the last thing I would just touch on a little bit is, as Chris mentioned, we're trying to be more efficient, whether that's energy use in our buildings or reducing waste or bringing in electric or alternative fuel vehicles. So even though there are large upfront costs associated with some of these things like electrification, I think in the medium and long term, we are also expecting to see cost efficiencies come from this. So as we reduce fuel, we reduce energy use, we reduce maintenance on our vehicles, things of this nature, we would expect to see cost savings in the medium and long term.
Picking up on the points that you were making there was a recent global survey on trust. And in that, I think, I'm going to quote the figures roughly, but over 65% of respondents would prefer to do business with a company that has sustainability aspects. But equally, an equal number of people, maybe slightly more, want to work for a company that is committed to doing something. And it seems society as a whole generally feels that businesses should be doing more about climate change and sustainability. So I think that really echoes in with that. Dave, over to you.
Thank you, John. Cindy, I wanted to pick up, and Chris, so it may be early days for you guys, but we've been studying the electrification of fleets, and from our modeling and some of the measurements that we've been doing, when customers do it and do it correctly, there's significant savings on fleet, on the operating cost, like just the energy piece, the electrification versus gas or maybe diesel. Certainly maintenance, which Chris, you'd be all over. So I'm like, we're pretty convinced that, for all the reasons that you said, it makes good sense, but there's economics behind this. Just most customers don't have the infrastructure in place to actually measure that or understand that. From my understanding and discussions with Purolator, you guys are all over this, and that's something you'll be able to measure and demonstrate that as you go forward. So, and I do want to say this too, because I've been following Purolator for a while since your big announcement, and you are one of the leaders in Canada, certainly on the fleet for sure. And so there's a lot that can be learned from people like yourself. And I've been told by senior management, that's one of the reasons why you're on the podcast, is actually help Canada with this process. So kudos to Purolator and to yourselves for doing that work. So now I've got the tough question to ask, and it comes back to what John said, is, far too often when we talk to clients, they always talk about the pain or the challenges. And so because of that, they just stop and don't do it. But we should address it. We need to address it. So what would be the challenges that you guys can highlight about undertaking this transition? What do you need to be mindful of? And obviously you're overcoming those, or else you wouldn't keep on going. But what would be some challenges that you can share with our listeners?
So generally speaking, the first and foremost one that's kind of up in our face right now is timing. So, and timing leads to a couple other, tangential elements in terms of supply chain, products, utilities, that kind of thing. This isn't something you do overnight. This isn't something you do in a year. As we talked about earlier, you need to plan through these things and work through these things and get yourself set up based on, some of the criteria that Cindy had laid out before. The challenge now is to ensure that we have given ourselves enough runway and understand the interconnectivity of utilities, of supply chain, of OEM vehicles, and of our own selves being capable to train and get people up and running to deliver the vehicles. I think from a timing perspective, connecting this to utilities, the earlier, as whatever you want to call it, to get in front of utility you possibly can that you're working with in your region is vitally important. There are some utilities that are well ahead of the curve that are prepared for it. There's others that we've seen that may not be quite as advanced. And, give yourself and them the opportunity to work together to understand, what you need to do, the available power, the available resources they have to help support you. I think a lot of this, we all are still in the very early stages of this industry. We're all learning, and we continue to learn on a daily basis. But that, to me, that's the biggest challenge, is to give yourself the time to be able to work through it. Because the secondary element to that then becomes the supply chain. Because not only we, but many other fleets and industries and companies are looking to do electrification. So, the lineups, the queues are going to get longer. And I think what we're seeing is that, and this is the phrase I use, and many people have heard me use this. I call it the infrastructure of the infrastructure isn't prepared just yet. We need electricians, we need contractors, we need planners, we need inspectors, we need technicians, all of which are in high demand at this point in time, as well as the supply chain for transformers, switchgear, these kinds of things. So there is that idea that you need to get out early, so that maybe that this queue of people in front of you isn't as long. But we also need to build out the technical infrastructure to support it across Canada. When more and more companies like ourselves begin to get online, and I'm speaking now just from electrification perspective, more and more companies get online, there is going to be high demand for power. There is going to be high demand for utility engagement. And hopefully, as a country, we will be prepared. And we haven't even got into the regulatory side of it yet either, as governments and municipalities begin to understand the dynamics of this industry. What regulations, what rules are they going to put in place to help manage this industry overall? So I think that's another area that we're still looking and understanding with. We want to work with governments and municipalities alike to understand what those dynamics are going to look like. And that's one of those ones where you can't quite predict, but I think we have to, use our experience to help maybe guide or inform some of that along the way. Because I think that could be one of those areas that could either be a bottleneck or it could open the floodgates either way. And so we just have to stay on top of that as we go forward. So I think those are some of the key pieces that we're learning and some of those challenges that we're seeing right now. I think, though, that on the flip side, though, the positivity, the engagement, the number of organizations getting involved. I've recently been to numerous trade shows, and the number of organizations and innovation startups that are engaged in this is tremendous. And there's a lot of thought going into this. And from our perspective, that's where we can pick up and we encourage others to go in and to do that, because that's what's going to grow this industry, is opening up the mind share, the thought process, the innovation on this is going to grow it exponentially. I've already seen within 2 years that, the change in battery technology alone, to increase the range and power of batteries when they thought this was still 4 or 5, maybe 10 years away. And that's the kind of the positive side of this environment where we're pushing it forward. And, if we can help to do that as an organization and share some of those learnings with others, we're happy to do so.
So maybe just to pick up on a couple of things Chris said and add a couple others just quickly. So I think one of the things we talk about too as it comes to sort of the speed of change and innovation, as it relates back to challenges too, is just, again, making that decision around, where you want to be in this transition, because there are concerns in terms of how quickly technologies are changing and evolving and getting better. So that is one thing to consider. Also, the pace of the change in general is challenging. I mean, we've set science-based targets for 2030, and the level of adoption of electric vehicles and other low carbon solutions is pretty high. That needs to happen between now and 2030 to achieve those goals. So I would say the amount of work that's needed is a lot to take in sometimes. The other thing which, we hear, and I hear this a lot, is related to, of course, the upfront costs. This can be very challenging for many organizations to fund these changes. So one thing I would suggest related to this, of course, is to take advantage of any of the incentive programs that are available for you. There is at times quite a bit of work that is required, resources again, to participate in some of these programs, but there are opportunities out there to help fund some of the infrastructure and vehicles. And then the last challenge I would just mention, which we're very focused on as well, is the change management that's required across the organization. So, we talked earlier about the fact that we need to engage employees right across the organization in order to make this a success. So I think trying to pinpoint all the different players and make sure that they are on board, they've been communicated to, they've been trained, that's a huge amount of effort that has to take place across the organization, and of course can be challenging.
Cindy, Chris, this has been a great episode. To end this off, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Well, I will tell you from an electrification perspective, what I will say is that it works. We're actually, we're driving vehicles, we're driving our routes, our operations are successful, our people are engaged. We are at early stages, but we can tell you that, we are starting to see the success. We're starting to see the improvements, and we're starting to see the results, and we're very encouraged by it. And we certainly encourage others to go down the path. And we realize, as Cindy said, the economics sometimes are a struggle. There's no question, but it's working.
Thanks, Chris. Cindy, do you have a biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, I would just add to what Chris said. Yes, it's working, and we're starting to see some of the successes. So I would just encourage everyone to get started. Take those first steps. We talked earlier about the importance of senior leadership support and buy-in. So I think just getting started, figuring out, how you can have the biggest impact, and getting that support and buy-in from your organization and your leadership is really important. And just know that it does work, as Chris said. So, we can be successful, and we can do this, and we just need to get started.
Thanks for that, Cindy. John, what's your biggest takeaway?
Yeah, there are so many potential takeaways here. So I've got to pick on one thing out of it. And I'm going to pick on something that Cindy said, and it could just be expanded a bit more, but it's, where do you want to be? And I think that is so important, particularly if organisations haven't started this journey, and also for those that are doing it. Don't automatically think you have to be net zero by 2050. Where do you want to be? What would make sense? And I think having a real open discussion about where you want to be in the transition, I think could be really useful. Thanks for that, John. Dave, what's your biggest takeaway?
As John said, there's many, but I think this is an iterative scenario that, as Chris suggested, it's changing all the time. So what you did or planned 2 years ago, it may change because of technology, markets, your customers' requirements. I also think what was stated, that early adopters in this situation will have a significant advantage, because we know utilities will be challenged to actually get the infrastructure in place. So that I think that speaks volumes. And then, Cindy conveyed that it's a senior management spot on from our thing. And last thing is creating awareness and education to create that culture change. That's a big piece that needs to be considered. And that's not an easy thing to do, because not a lot of people actually understand this. So, but Cindy, it sounds like you and your group are well on that. So good for you guys. And thank you both for sharing this with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave, John, Chris, and Cindy, for a great episode. Talk to you next week.
It's been good. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360 Energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts.